Ah, shit. Oh, man. All right.
Hello?
Hey, Steve. This is Doug. How are you, bud?
Doug?
Doug.
Who?
Doug from the podcast. What Magic Is
From
This?
the podcast.
Yeah.
Hi, Doug. I'm doing well. Just bopping around, doing my thing.
Okay, cool, man. Hey, I'm in a little bit of a bind here, man. So October has come and gone. I was supposed to have this episode. It was supposed to be out on Halloween, All Hallows Eve. You know how every podcast does something special for Halloween. I got sick, man. I didn't have anything. It's been almost a month since my last show, and I'm hitting the panic button here because I don't have anything for anybody. So I'm just wondering. And I'm thinking this. So let me run this up the flagpole and see if anybody's going to salute it. But people have been asking me a lot to cover this one thing, and I think that because it's been so long since I've had a show out, I just got to give the punters what they want. So on the What Magic Is This Discord, somebody brought up, they'd like to hear a show on Jack Parsons, and then you piped up and you were like, oh, me. I want to be on this show. And in fact, you actually demanded to be on the show. I'm going to bring this up here. This is actually what you said. You will bring down 1,000 curses of every unleashed demon from hell upon me if you're not on this show. So, Steve, I'm just
remember that. I wouldn't say things like that.
Steve, you said you would bring down I have it. It's on record. I'll put it. I'll send it to you. But you said you would rain down 1,000 curses of every unleashed demon upon me if you're not on this show. So I'm just wondering, man. Do you want to help me out to put out a show about this person that I've probably got over 100 emails asking me to cover, handsome Jack Parsons?
You know what? Let's do it.
All right, perfect. All right, here's what's going to happen. I'm just going to find something. I'm going to find some I don't know, some 1940s Hollywood jazz. I'm going to just hit the play. All right, yeah. Oh man, that's some good tunes. That's some good tunes. All right, here we go. Let's do this. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Magic Is This Podcast, a podcast about magic, the occult, the esoteric, the paranormal, the supernatural, and the weird. My name is Douglas Batchelor, and oh my goodness, each and every one of you are in for an absolute treat today, because today is going to be yet another episode of the Fool's Gallery. Now, the Fool's Gallery is where I will talk about specific individuals who've added their own little special something to the world of magic and the occult. And today's figure is, without a doubt, probably going to be one of the biggest portraits within the Fool's Gallery, and certainly somebody I'm pretty sure almost everyone listening to this podcast has heard of before. A gentleman by the name of Jack Parsons. And so, Steve, I'm so happy to have you on the show today because of the fact that I've only covered, since talking to you about Paracelsus, I've only ever talked about one other person, and that was Hildegard of Bingen. There's been a long stretch of time where we haven't been in the Fool's Gallery. So today I'm begging you to help me out and talk about Jack Parsons. But before we really get in there, I need to ask you, who is Jack Parsons?
Oh man, how do you sum up one of the truly most interesting people that I think has ever lived? Jack Parsons, just kind of, if I were to give him a single statement, I would say Jack Parsons is easily one of the most fascinating Americans. Just on the first generation of Thelemites, inventor of rocketry, founding the precursor to NASA, starting a quasi-secondary religion under Thelema by accident, and then all of a sudden blowing up at the end. There's just so many details to this man at like encompass radical democracy and free love and everything is just a true experiment in what liberatory like living could possibly be.
Absolutely. I think for myself, Jack Parsons is the epitome of American occultism. I think that he more than Edgar Casey, more than most figures who get promulgated a lot, I think truly the beating, explosive heart of American practical magic is Jack Parsons. So let's actually just go through a little bit of his life because he lived a hell of a life. He was only 37 years old before he decided to. Well, he didn't decide to, but until he blasted off from this existence at least. But here's a little bit on the story of John Whiteside Parsons. Now, his name was Marvel, wasn't it?
Yes, he was born Marvel. That was just I don't think he ever really went by it. I believe that was his father's name and was named after him as Marvel Jr. And then they just kind of dropped it, if I remember that detail correctly.
For sure. Yeah, he was born on October 2nd of 1914 in the city of Angels, Los Angeles. And his family moved from Massachusetts to Los Angeles, and they were okay. They were pretty well off, but his mother later divorced pretty early on, separated from Jack's father because he had been seeing prostitutes or had been seeing a prostitute. And his mother, I believe her name was Ruth or Ruby. Ruth, I think it's Ruth. Anyhow, Ruth found out and basically made it public that John or Jack Senior was philandering, and so he went back to Massachusetts and actually became more involved in the military there. Had another kid that Jack Parsons or John Whiteside Parsons, the subject of our show today, met only once. But it was just Jack and his mom hanging around for a little bit in Los Angeles. But her parents came to visit and live out in Los Angeles, and they moved to a place that was called Millionaire's Mile in Los Angeles, which was Orange Grove Boulevard, and particularly in Pasadena. And Jack's mom's parents were very wealthy, so Jack grew up with a lot of servants around the house. He had a privileged lifestyle, living on Millionaire Mile. And this is something that not a lot of people talk about, but when he was in school, I don't think he was really bullied, but a lot of people make note of the fact that he was kind of like effeminate. He was viewed as kind of being a little bit of a sissy boy. Steve, how would you contrast that with how he behaved as an adult?
In some ways, I actually think that's a bit of a precursor to the way that he would behave. I don't think it's necessarily like a difference where, he was, as an adult, a charismatic sex cult leader. But fundamentally, like, there was a dictate inside the parsonage, which we'll get into, I'm sure, that was about this like radical freedom of person that I think shows what Jack would have wanted from the beginning of if he is this like slightly effeminate, potentially queer kid who is like obsessed with science fiction and fantasy and not necessarily like living up to this masculine ideal, then he could live that life in this freedom that he is like begins to espouse later.
Yeah. He's a lot of people when they talk about him later on in life say that he came across as being somewhat like macho and almost to like a degree where he would pull stupid stunts. And when people talk about his pranks, like he would do silly things that kind of would like show him as being like a kind of rough around the edges dude. But as far as his early schooling is concerned, he wasn't a very good student. He's yet another example of somebody who was I mean, the G word gets thrown around so often, but Jack actually was a genius. Like, there's no other way of cutting it. He was a genius, but early schooling for him was pretty tough. He most likely definitely had dyslexia that was undiagnosed, and so even some of his letters later, if you can find them, it's not that they're poorly written. It's just that they show signs of somebody who is definitely dyslexic. And he was not great at school. There's all these stories of him being pulled out and put in different schools and whatnot. But throughout all of his early childhood, he definitely was interested in science fiction and early rocketry. And in fact, he was kicked out of one school for putting explosives in a toilet and flushing them and blowing up the toilet. So there's that old thing. He met one of his later associates and somebody who was part of what will be called the Suicide Squad. We'll touch on that in a little bit. But his friend Edward Foreman, and they loved rockets. They like this idea of rocketry. Now, here's something that I want to get into everybody's mind. Rockets are something that, for the most part, if you were born over the last 60 years, you know about rockets. But for people back in the day, rocketry, to say rocket, you might as well have been talking about science fiction. It just wasn't a thing that people thought about. In fact, I'm going to try to hammer home this point is that when nascent rocketry within the United States started to get going, they didn't call it rocketry. They called it jet propulsion because they didn't want it to sound silly. Because if you went around saying, I do rockets, people would say, like, yeah, sure, bud. It'd be like somebody who was able to come up with a particle replicator right now and then going around saying, I've made a transporter. People would just be like, what? No, you didn't. And then you say, no, I made a particle transport replicator. And people are like, okay, interesting. But if you just walked around now and just saying, like, I built a transporter like Star Trek, people would be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's
I
what
think
that's
the big part is that, like, the scientific community just flatly didn't believe that something like a rocket could exist. There was lots of confusion about the way, like, fuel sources and, like, pressure and burning and trajectory would just the math didn't work for the way that they were trying to approach it. So that's part of the reason that, like, rocket was so, like, frowned upon in the way that they were approaching it. It was like, this was in fact just fake science fiction. It's like, sure, let's take a rocket to the moon, Jack. Why don't you?
right. It's really quite incredible, particularly for us now. You know, rockets. SpaceX is sending rockets out like every week, right? But back in the day, it was viewed as being impossible. It was the stuff that was it was in silent films and whatnot. You know, like this that whole rocket flying into the eye of the moon kind of stuff. So yes, they had to call things like jet propulsion to get anybody to actually like pay attention. Anyways, met a friend by the name of Edward Foreman, really important person. As he became an adult, he was very fascinated in chemicals. He eventually got a job at a place called the Hercules Powder Company, where he was actually making quite a bit of money. It's weird. Jack goes through this. Maybe I'm getting ahead of myself. Jack goes through periods where he's got a lot of money and then he's got no money, and he just seems to ping pong and oscillate between. There's very few periods of time where he's like doing okay and just kind of like middle. It's either he's rolling in clover or he's got nothing whatsoever and he's got to live in like a basement or a coach house or something like that. But at Hercules Powder Company, that's where he really cut his teeth learning as much as he could about chemicals. He was very fascinated with chemicals and chemical. And it's so strange for somebody who was dyslexic. And a lot of people talk about when Jack would work with chemicals, he almost seemed to have some kind of an intuitive element of how chemicals worked and how things could burn. It was this very odd thing where he seemed to be in some way a savant, and yet he had trouble reading and he had trouble writing because of his dyslexia. And what eventually occurs that him and Edward Foreman, they go to lectures on rocketry or jet propulsion at Caltech. Now, what's Caltech, Steve?
It's a university down in California. It was very well known as like particularly a scientific research university. Still is on the engineering and more practical side of the sciences. So the fact that they were like trying to get their research and funding through Caltech was going to add like both a lot of institutional backing, so they had funding, opportunities for research, like literally materials to work with, but also like that was throwing a huge name behind it of like, hey, if Caltech is going to actually be working on this, like we're really, really rolling in it.
Yeah, when they first went to this one lecture by I forget the name of this person who was talking about rockets and building rockets, they then Edward Foreman and Jack went to one of the people a high up. Pretty notorious person at Caltech, and they were like, "This is what we want to do. This is what we want to experiment." And this person said, "Take it under the arches. I don't care." But eventually, they went and got into the good graces of somebody else at Caltech by the name of Theodore von Karman. Theodore von Karman is kind of considered like, yes, Jack Parsons is one of the early fathers of rocketry, but none of this happens without the good graces of Theodore von Karman. And so both Jack and his friend Edward Foreman are bought into GALCIT, which is the Guggenheim Aeronautical Laboratory at the California Institute of Technology. So we're talking a lot over the last 3 minutes here about rockets and stuff like this.
Mm-hmm.
And here's something that is going to be very unfortunate for this episode for everybody, but I have to kind of draw a line in the sand here. And for the most part, we're not going to be talking too much about Jack's rocketry, which is really unfortunate. It will come up every once in a while. So
yeah, I was going to say it has to come up because part of the genius of Jack Parsons, I think, even from an occult sense, is that he took this stuff seriously. And by stuff, I mean like the science fiction. I think if there's a real sense that a lot of occultists, magicians, mystics, etc., look to the past, and I think that's really important. Like we still don't know the secrets of Egypt, quote unquote. But Jack was looking to the future. He was looking at like what the bleeding edge of even ideas were, and like the rockets are always going to be part of like the way that Jack is approaching all of this stuff.
Definitely. I told Steve, actually, I'm going to cut that part out. I just need to make a note of that actually. So anyways, I'll figure it out. Over the last 10 days, I've just been stuffing my head with the information of Jack Parsons in his life. And the rocketry is such an important aspect of his life. I'm just going to try to rattle off over the next minute here as to some of the things that Jack did. So it was because of Caltech, he meets this other person by the name of Frank Molina. And so the three of these guys, they become what is kind of known, and some other people kind of known as on Caltech, the Suicide Squad. And Suicide Squad doesn't come directly, like I know there's movies and stuff like that, but it doesn't come directly from them. It was just something that they would call people who were involved in things that that most likely it was a fun, playful name that they might blow themselves up. Anyways, it was a fun name that these guys went through. So the three of them, we have Frank. Frank most likely was the more theoretical. He knew the physics and the theory of rocketry. And then you have Edward, who was Jack's friend, younger friend, who was all involved in the machinery. He really liked machines and metal and building things of that sort. And then you have Jack, who was, as I said, he was a chemical man. He was all about the chemicals and burning and things of that sort. So it is not hyperbolic to say at this point that if these three, but particularly Jack Parsons, didn't do what they did, America would not have gone to the moon as soon as they did. So there were a lot of developments that occurred within the Soviet space program, and that's much later on. But for Jack Parsons, the biggest claim to fame for him as far as his rocketry stuff was the production of this thing called GALCIT 53, which was a solid state fuel that would be used. And he got the idea from it with combining what he knew about a ancient weapon called Greek fire combined with this form of asphalt that he saw when he saw roofers working in Los Angeles. He saw this asphalt and the way that it was kind of solid, but it could still be, in a way, pourable and liquid. So Galset, I believe everything up to this point that they were producing only provided so much thrust and propulsion. But with Galset 53, this compound that these three guys came up with, and I believe there was this other gentleman, that they were able to produce something that just blew everybody's socks off. And literally, it was night and day, but the earlier aspects of getting all the way up to Galset 53. And then this was the thing. And they were coming into a period of time where what is called jet assisted takeoff was a big thing, which is strapping rockets to planes so that they can take off on shorter and shorter runways. So, some more things to summary. Jack was involved in the rocketry. There are periods of time where what happens is that he comes under investigation for certain things. The FBI give him clearance and then take it away. Jack actually rats on a few of his friends that were involved in his company that they thought were communists. It gets a little bit messy, but all I can say is there's a book called Strange Angel, which is a biography of Jack Parsons. It actually goes into the rocketry stuff really, really well. But I digress.
I think the other big thing to mention on that part, it's not only that Jack was like constantly under surveillance because of the like fact that he is working on top government secrets all the time for being involved in this rocket program. It's really important to remember that being not a Christian at this time in America is terrible thing.
Yeah.
So the fact that he is getting involved in Thelema and espousing essentially anti-Christian thought at basically every personal interaction he had kind of sent up red flags everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, and some of the earlier people within the Suicide Squad, I forget the name of the gentleman particularly. He was involved in kind of like a communist study group. I hate to say this, and
That's literally what it was.
yeah, yeah. Before we get to Thelema, though, Jack Parsons at a church dance meets somebody by the name of Helen Northrup, and this happens, and not too shortly after, they get married in 1935. And it's while Jack is at one of his friend's place, a friend who I believe was a used car dealer. He finds a very particular book on their bookshelf, a book by the name of Conks on Pax in their library. And this book was written by none other than the great beasts themselves, Aleister Crowley. Now, just a comment on Conks on Pax. The cover design of this book is very, very striking. In fact, I actually think the cover of the book is cooler than the book itself. It's this really interesting design, and if it's one of those things that you have to kind of go look at it. The letters are really interesting. So it's a striking book. So I know why Jack would probably have picked it up, because when I actually saw a copy of this, and I was able to find a copy of this. I think it was a reprint that somebody put out, but it was at a library in Edmonton, Alberta. It is a very striking cover. Would you agree, Steve?
Absolutely. I actually have a hard time looking at it. It gives me a headache because of the like visual effect of like the white and black stripes.
It's
essentially is the way it looks.
Yeah, it's a really striking book, and so Jack becomes interested in like, oh, what is this, and who is this person? And eventually, he finds out about this place called Agape Lodge, and he meets the head of this lodge by the name of Wilfred Smith. Steve, what is Agape Lodge?
Agape Lodge was, one of the few OTO.
It was the only one by this point.
Was it the only one at the time? I couldn't quite remember if it was the only one in America.
Yeah.
But it was, first and only American lodge of the OTO. So, like, legitimately Crowley's personal disciples in Los Angeles. Jack stumbling upon a Gnostic mass and meeting Wilfred was kind of the beginning of all of this like crazy occult stuff, though we may or may not have stories of him trying to summon the devil as a child.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe that.
I don't know. Truthfully, I think that is a little bit of storytelling that he might have put in
I
there.
think it's
Yeah.
a little bit of storytelling, but at least it would make sense. But yeah, that's stumbling upon Agape is how Jack and all of that just started with Thelema and
Yeah.
his wholehearted embrace of it.
Fanatical almost. Like I wouldn't say like he would have, um he would have committed murder for Aleister Crowley, but he was very, very much he ate it wholesale. He really and after this period of time, he reads as much of Crowley as he could get his hands on. He would invite friends to Agape Lodge. One of his friends from Caltech, somebody by the name of Grady McMurdy, who's a person who's very important to the OTO. And for those people that don't know, the OTO is the Ordo Templi Orientis, which is it was originally a German secret society that eventually became Aleister Crowley's not his more public facing secret society besides the AA.
They describe themselves as the first order to accept the law of Thelema.
Yes, there you go. So yes,
so it's not technically a Crowley's organization, but it is.
It is, yeah, exactly. And so yeah, he's inviting all these people here. Grady McMurdy, again, figure maybe I'll talk about in the future. Maybe he became kind of like the heir of Aleister Crowley and eventually became the head of Aleister.
Refounded the OTO or revived it or however you want to put it. Well, one of the competing OTOs.
Yeah.
God, that stuff is annoying.
It is.
I will warn everyone now. I do not have a high opinion of this organization and will talk shit about it.
All right. I can't wait for it. So one of the other people that come to one of these Gnostic masses, it's fascinating too. Jack, he hasn't joined it yet. It's super fascinating. So he's inviting people there. And one of these people is his wife's sister by the name of Betty Northrup, but her real name is Sarah. And eventually he joins Agape Lodge in 1941. So the Americans aren't in the war yet, in the Second World War. But yes, Jack joins in 1941. He goes all in. Like he is so enamored with Thelema, as I said. And for those who don't know, I really hope you do. Thelema is this philosophy founded by Aleister Crowley. I did a whole month of Aleister Crowley episodes. Please listen to them, particularly the very first one where I talk with Richard Kaczynski who wrote the biography Per Durabo. It's a pretty good biography. You should read it as well. Jack Parsons, he becomes kind of like the shining star of Agape Lodge. He becomes the dude, and Aleister Crowley apparently gets letters from Jack, and they start a correspondence back and forth. Jane Wolfe, who was part of Aleister Crowley's, I'm just going to say, sex club in Sicily. She was there for a little bit. She's now in Los Angeles. She writes to Aleister Crowley basically saying this Jack Parsons guy, he's pretty interesting. She says he's probably bisexual, but very interesting cat. And Thelema burns brightly within this man. So when they're having this conversation, what actually starts occurring between Crowley is he gets overly involved in the goings on at Agape Lodge, and he really dislikes the person who heads it by the name of Wilfred Smith.
I mean, to be fair, I don't think Crowley liked anyone ever, but he seemed to especially dislike anyone starting to attain any kind of personal autonomy or authority inside of Thelema. So Smith becomes disfavored the moment that he's starting to really establish himself. Yeah. This ends up going to Jack too once all of that starts falling out, which we'll get into. But Uncle Al was not a nice guy.
No, he was very ornery, and this is
nasty man.
This is coming towards the end of his life. 1941. He's 6 years away from dying. He's in London, I believe, at this time, getting bombed. I'm not trying to give Crowley the benefit of the doubt, but his adventures in London aren't great. He did not have a good time. His heroin addiction starts stepping up because of his issues and whatnot. So he's ornery at best and overly involved in the going on. I mean, letters can only travel so fast, but he is writing letters nearly like every day to this lodge, because this lodge is actually, people are starting to go there. And what Jack is doing is that he's inviting people to come check out the Gnostic Mass and things at Agape Lodge. These are writers that are famous nowadays. These are people like Heinlein, we're talking Ray Bradbury, and people of these varieties. And Jack becomes very enamored with one book that we're going to talk about a little bit later on, and an author of this book. But this novel is called Darker Than You Think, which is a strange one. So what eventually occurs is that Jack becomes very enamored with his wife's sister. This is Sarah Northrup, and they become a thing. There's this whole like free love stuff that was already happening at Agape Lodge, and which is one of the reasons Crowley hates it. He just calls it like a love, like a swingers club.
Which, again, I find so funny, simply because if there is a single place that has ever truly tried to practice what Crowley ever put in place about love and sex, it was Agape Lodge. The Abbey of Thelema was basically his sex club. It was all about him. But like the fact that they were trying to dissolve marriage, encourage polyamorous relationships across the cult as like people willed it, and very explicitly willed it. Like it's kind of bizarre how much he hated his own writings being put into practice.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. We'll definitely touch on that in a little bit. Yeah, so there's swinging going on, and there's polyamory happens. One thing though, Jack, and it needs to be mentioned because it comes into effect a little bit later on, is that so Jack is going with his wife's sister. She's only 17. So Sarah's only 17 years old. And there's some interesting statutory laws in Los Angeles at that time. What happens with Jack's wife, Helen, is that she decides to become involved with Wilfred Smith. So goes over there. Everybody's good. Everybody kind of remains friends, though. But it is around this time that one of the most notorious places within the American occult is bought and lived in, which is called the Parsonage at 1003 Orange Grove Boulevard. Steve, what's the thing with the Parsonage?
If you're gonna find one place as just like the purest of pure LA communes, you gotta go to the Parsonage. This, I believe, it was owned explicitly by Jack, and at this time, and just kind of was his response to allowing them to have a safe place to practice Thelema. Because, like I mentioned, new religious orders are very, very, very publicly sanctioned at this time. Actively not Christian, and then just kind of like weird woo shit happening on top of it all made it so like these people were getting investigated constantly, harassed constantly, and this was part of their way of like having a place that is explicitly for Thelema and the practice of Thelema. So it's owned by Parsons. They can't have things revoked from them. They're able to like actually have a like spot where they can have gay sex outside of marriage, practice occult rituals, perform the Gnostic Mass without any interference. Like there is an entire social system being practiced at Agape inside the parsonage that really has not been able to be replicated since.
Yeah, something that I forgot to mention was that the Agape Lodge had a place, their own little place there, and eventually it just moved into the parsonage. So it just came to 1003 Orange Grove Boulevard. Jack, in his room that he had with Helen, there were strange altars. There was the stele of revealing, the thing that Aleister Crowley said that his wife Rose. Anyways, it's the whole to do strange rituals going on in the place. Like what's interesting is that Jack went so heavy in that Jack's interest in magic didn't just stay at Thelema. He was experimenting with other stuff that kind of freaked people out, and that becomes even more of a thing later on. But what they do is that they also have livestock here, and I don't want this to sound sensationalistic because we're so removed these days. We're so removed from the ideas of and it's coming back a little bit of having things like chickens or sheep or goats. That would have been somewhat normal, particularly in a burgeoning Los Angeles. Like Los Angeles still had aspects and places that were, kind of rural, and so they would have livestock, which would be used for food, but they were also used for blood rituals. Like they were, some of these animals were sacrificed for rituals. But Jack apparently, he liked this whole communal thing. People would bring their kids, and he'd go out looking for fairies in the backyard and in the area. So it sounds good, but yes, people also doing drugs and all sorts of things. Yeah, there's the FBI would come back, and here's the thing: it was either the FBI or the Pasadena police department. They'd come by all the time and just be like, they're saying horrible things are happening, and they'd be like, this is a new religious move. Like it's not so bad, and they never got charged. There's lots of complaints events against them.
Again, it's the sex and the fact that they aren't Christians. Like this is a point that I think it's really underemphasized in lots of discussions about Jack in general. Like they're like, oh well, look at this fancy Thelemic man who built rockets, yada yada yada. It's so important to me to constantly keep coming back to the 1940s were not a great time to not be a straight white Christian.
Yeah, definitely. Jack, as per usual, because this is just what he does, he gets into some shenanigans. So his friend from Caltech, who will later become the head of the OTO or revives the OTO, Grady McMurdy, Jack has an affair with his wife, Claire McMurdy. She gets pregnant. Jack makes her abort the child. Grady and Jack don't see eye to eye ever again. And while Jack, I think, wants to be friends with Grady, Grady doesn't. He does not like Jack after this. So the shenanigans continue, and eventually the head, Wilfred Smith, he's kicked out. Jack Parsons becomes the new head of Agape Lodge. Members who had been part of Agape Lodge before Jack, they don't like this move. A lot of them aren't totally happy with all of the wife swapping and the partner swapping and things of that. But Jack is an extraordinary charismatic man, and he's bringing in new members. And as far as like people complaining to Crowley, because people were writing letters to Crowley all the time, they're being like, this young kid. As Crowley was just like, as long as he's bringing people in, that is all I care about. And there's this amount. There's an enormous amount of infighting that occurs at Agape Lodge through a period of about 3 years, and Jack gets a little bit tired of it. He steps down as the head of Agape Lodge, but Crowley kind of just says, like, I need you to remain the head of OTO. So something happens here, particularly the head of OTO in California, in Agape Lodge. So just to be specific there for everybody. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Steve?
I mean, not a whole lot. Fundamentally, I think Jack was set up to fail more than anything else. Yeah. This was not a man who was ever meant to have any kind of administrative at all.
No.
So there was never going to be a sense that he could have succeeded at this.
No. So there's some things that happened to Jack at work. So this whole Caltech suicide squad, people that I was bringing up, that eventually becomes one of the premier organizations that becomes part of the American space program. There's 3 letters that we have not brought up, and that is JPL. And this is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which had those three guys, Edward, Frank, and Jack, as the main members. There were people that came and went. They were the founders of the JPL. Again, I'm saying this not to be hyperbolic, and it's so strange because we live in the age of space exploration and travel. We do not land on the moon without JPL. without the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But what happens is that Jack and the rest of the guys, they basically get bought out from JPL. Jack loses his job there. A lot of pressures from the whole communist thing. Again, Jack does some ratting out, and some of the former members of JPL. There's just some mendacity, and truthfully, Jack and Frank, they're kind of like nonplussed by it. They're like, we did our job. We're doing our job. We don't really care. Whatever, buy us out. So Jack loses his job. So he's not great for money. So what he does is he starts renting out rooms at the parsonage and for people to move in there that aren't Thelemites to begin with and aren't members of Agape Lodge. And here is where the story takes an enormous turn. And again, not to sound hyperbolic, but this is something that changes the course of American spiritual history to such an insane degree that it cannot be understated. One of the people that move in at 1003 Orange Grove Boulevard is somebody by the name of Lafayette Ron Hubbard, or l.ron Hubbard, who is, I'm sure everybody knows, but I'll say it again. He is the founder of Scientology, one of the most notorious religions in the United States to this day. And Jack loves l.ron Hubbard. They're two peas in a pod. They're great. He wrote to Aleister Crowley basically saying that l.ron Hubbard is, quote, the most thelemic person I have ever met. How right Jack would be. What do you think of l.ron Hubbard? It's so crazy. It's so insane that all of this happened.
I'm not sure you could have imagined two people crossing so perfectly than these two, of just like, I mean, this is the fun thing. The Scientologists will always fight forever that this was never a relationship that l.ron Hubbard actually cared about. He was a spy or something, I think is what they try to claim. But I legitimately believe that this man was like quite earnest at the beginning about this relationship with Jack, that Scientology is a version of Thelema.
Yes, I would actually agree. And we'll touch on this in a little bit further on.
Crazy batshit version that is a bad thing that exists in the world. But
it's incredible that these two should have ever come into contact, but yet that they lived with each other, and not just live with each other. Things get just even stranger. So what happens is that Jack's current wife, which is, I don't know if they're married. Again, bad Doug for not doing more of his research. I think that Jack and Sarah are married at this point, or something of that variety. It's yes. Is it like a thelemic marriage?
Not legally.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So what happens is that Sarah takes a shine to this most thelemic person that Jack has ever met, and l.ron Hubbard and Sarah Betty Northrup, they shack up. And this hurts Jack from all intents and purposes. There's no other way to put it, is that what occurs is kind of like a weird tension within Jack's life, where he was fine with all the wife swapping, and then it kind of hits him that his really good new friend, his thelemic wife, is now hers. So he's got that thing where he's like, I want to remain thelemic, each person living to their will. But he doesn't deal with it very well. He still has this weird thing about it. And he says, like, it's good. I'm glad for both of them. But his behavior leads me to believe that he does not take it very well. What do you think?
I mean, yeah, that's basically it. Jack was pretty good about the freedom of sexual relationships when it benefited him.
Yeah.
And it was a blow to his ego when it didn't, which I think is a particularly human emotion. I don't think it's a like mark of anything. But yeah, he definitely. That was a sore spot.
Yeah.
And you will it just always remains a sore spot until they steal his boat and his money and leave him to blow up later.
Yeah. So what also happens here within the parsonage, and there's people from Agape and people outside of Agape Lodge there, and it's really funny. He was getting other people to move in there that weren't Thelemic, but he was just like, he basically put ads in the newspaper advertising to come stay at the parsonage, and just basically like no squares. He didn't write that, but he's just like bohemians and like, if you're a straight white Christian, you need not apply kind of thing. And so there's just always these people around. And what occurs within members of the Agape Lodge is they start writing letters to each other and to Aleister Crowley, basically saying like, Jack is doing weird stuff. He's going deep on voodoo. Jane Wolfe specifically says that she thinks that he's trying to summon and create a homunculus, which is like it's a magical life being. There's spooky stuff that starts occurring because of Jack and this drive to do something different, to just experiment with as many forms of magic as possible. And there's poltergeist activity apparently within the house, creaks and noises and voices and dark things appearing at the windows. One of the authors of one of the biographies of Jack Parsons, George Pendle, who wrote Strange Angel, he seems to think that it was just L.ron Hubbard and Sarah being kind of like young lovers, being mischievous and like throwing things around the room to try and scare Jack, who was really, really gullible. But having experienced, poltergeist activity myself, it's kind of hard to fake. It's really hard to fake, but you never know. L.ron Hubbard, I'm just going to say he's a shithead.
Oh, absolutely. I don't think this man has ever. He clearly made lots of favorable impressions on lots of people, but I don't think he ever did anything that you could probably call like genuine care for people. Probably just from pure narcissism.
Yeah. So Jack, everybody's talking. He wants to summon something. And so he gets his buddy l.ron together, and they begin what is without a doubt probably the most notorious magical working of the 20th century, truly, which is called the Babylon working. Now we're going to that's it. So we're going to go into this a little bit more in depth. But the very first little part of the Babylon working, and it was done between L.ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. Again, we'll get into some of the details a little bit later, is that Jack wanted to summon an elemental. And then somebody decides to show up to the parsonage to rent a room. And this is a person by the name of Marjorie Cameron. Now, Steve, maybe you know this because I read it somewhere and then I was trying to find it. This wasn't the first time that they met, that Marjorie and Jack met. I think they met one time before, like somehow weirdly, but this is like she showed up right after the initial first part of the Babylon working. Mm-hmm. And this second meeting, apparently it was like sparks for Jack. He thought that he had summoned the elemental in the form of a woman. They apparently went into the bedroom, didn't come out for 2 weeks. I feel bad for Marjorie in a way because Jack was definitely doing magical stuff and she had no clue. Marjorie Cameron, until Jack dies, Marjorie wants nothing to do with witchcraft. And it's very it's very clear she does not like the kind of craziness that Jack was getting up to. She wasn't a huge fan. It's a little bit after, I think. Jack's death affected Marjorie quite a bit. But yeah, Marjorie Cameron wasn't aware that Jack was doing some sex magic while this happened.
Not a good thing to do, people. Sex magic, fine. Great. Love it. Yeah. Don't do it with a partner who doesn't know that you're doing it.
Yeah.
That's weird.
There are things... Jack is an interesting character, and perhaps we can talk about this a little bit later, but he does a couple of things that, we've things that are not great. I mean, of course, everybody knows about me and how I'm not a huge fan of Crowley because dude's a shithead. Jack does some things, ratting and pointing fingers at people who were probably, they were communists, but like he didn't have to do that. He did that to save his own skin. the sex magic with people unwillingly, and he does it later on with prostitutes unwillingly as well. Like he was really big into that kind of stuff. Consent really wasn't a big thing in his sexual world as far as consent within saying like I'm doing sex magic particularly. So L.ron Hubbard is kind of like the Edward Kelly to Jack during this thing called the Babylon working. He's not so much the seer. Jack is the one doing the seeing, but what L.ron Hubbard is doing is the scribe, and he's writing things down. And there's some interesting stuff that he writes down. We'll talk about it for a little bit. But what eventually happens is that Marjorie Cameron, she goes away. Jack kicks the Babylon working up into overdrive, and he goes out into the Mojave Desert, and he comes back with a document. What does he have with him, Steve?
The fourth book of the Book of the Law.
The fourth book.
The highest heresy that any Thelemite has ever committed against the great prophet of the Aeon of Horus, that the holy text was not complete, and instead there is a fourth book, the Book of Babylon.
The Book of Babylon. It's called Liber 49. Yeah, it's a strange one. We'll touch on it in a little bit, but yeah, he basically comes back out of the desert being, and he does that. He does that thing that all prophets do at some point. I went to the desert. It's done. Everything's done. The Babylon working is finished, except it's not, because they go back and do some more stuff. Anyhow, Jack not doing so good money wise. The money that he got from the JPL, it starts to run out, so he has to sell the parsonage. He sells it, 1003 Orange Grove Boulevard, and he gifts being the head of Agape Lodge to somebody else. As Steve said, I agree with Steve entirely. Jack is not an administrative type. He's not a good leader. He's really good at looking out for himself, but he's not very good. But what he does do is that with his buddy l.ron, is that they start Allied Enterprises, and it's Jack Parsons, it's l.ron Hubbard, and it's Sarah Northrup, and the whole thing was to go to Florida, buy a whole bunch of boats, buy some yachts, and then take them through the Panama Canal, sell them back up the West Coast, and sell them in Los Angeles. So with this as the plan for it's such a like Jack's an idiot. Like it's just
it's hard. This man clearly trusts l.ron Hubbard more than anyone has ever possibly convinced him to trust somebody, and just gets fleeced. Which I mean I can understand. Like it's a stupid idea. I'm not condoning falling for blatant scams like this, but Ron is like his magical partner through all of this, has seen him and worked with him in just intense and powerful workings that they have claimed embodied a goddess on earth that has not had a physical manifestation either ever or in post-Christian times. And then that meant nothing to l.ron Hubbard, and he wanted to go on a world cruise.
So yeah, l.ron's down in he's enjoying himself in Miami, I believe. Jack's like, what happened with the plan? Eventually he's writing to Crowley being like, I think I got fleeced. And Crowley's like, in a moment of clarity, he's like, you think? And so he eventually gets a hold of l.ron Hubbard, and he calls him. And somebody who was in the room at the time of this phone call, basically, Jack started it really angry. How dare you, Lafayette, you did this thing. And then eventually his demeanor completely changes. And l.ron Hubbard must have had the gift of the gab. In fact, he must have had. Everybody talks about how he did have. He was a very good salesman, l.ron Hubbard. And apparently he has just basically calmed Jack Parsons down, saying like, no, we're still going for the plan, man. We're still going. Weeks pass, nothing happens. Jack Parsons, who's broke at this point, he uses what little money he has because he sunk close to $20,000 in Allied Enterprises. Back in the day, that's like $1 billion. It's not that much. I haven't done the inflation.
It's a lot of money.
A lot of money. Goes to Miami, finds Jack and Sarah. They're just living the life. They bought the yachts. They bought 3 yachts, but they're just enjoying themselves down there. And Jack gets pissed off. He's gonna have them arrested. He wants all of his money back. So what do l.ron and Sarah plan to do, Steve?
Oh, they're going to take the yachts on just a world cruise. They had told the government that they were going to China to collect some documents and written materials, and that was also a fabricated lie. I'm not sure anyone believes anything that L.ron Hubbard has ever written is true. So they set off, and a giant storm brings them back, which Jack has convinced is part of a magical working of the banishing ritual, the pentagram, I believe, of Mars. That he was able to hold them back.
Yeah, used.
Sure, why not?
He used a section of Francis Barris the Magus, conjurer Bartzabel, and the spirit of just a spirit of Mars, to cause a storm. And this is not hearsay. Sarah, in a biography, says, like, yeah, we were scared for our lives. The Coast Guard had to go out and save the future head of Sea Org. The wind ripped the sails apart. And Jack was entirely convinced that it was his magical working that caused them to come back to shore. Jack is fuming. He's so angry. Nearly come to blows. Things kind of happen from there on in. Jack takes them to court very quickly. And he's about to get his money back, and then Sarah pulls a really, really nifty move, worthy of being the wife of L.ron Hubbard, truly, in that she basically says, if you go ahead with these lawsuits and don't accept this, like, $2,000, we'll give you $2,000 to just go away and forget this all happened and Allied Enterprises is never a thing. Or you can continue with the lawsuits, and I'll tell everybody that you raped me when I was 17. It's statutory rape, which there was. There's no hiding that. So $2,000 American from $23,000 investment, I believe. This ends the relationship between L.ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons. Jack goes back to Los Angeles, never talks to L.ron ever again. Scientology tries to downplay absolutely any aspect of Agape Lodge and Jack Parsons. According to the biographies, L.ron Hubbard was there to try and save Sarah. He saw Sarah as being a victim of a cult, and he was sent in there to save her and break up a black magic cult. That's the Scientology lore between what all happened there, but everybody else is like, no, he was doing stuff with Jack.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh man, it's such a strange story. Like, it's one of those things. It's such a trite thing to say, Steve, that truth is stranger than fiction.
Oh yeah.
But Jack's life is so bizarre. Jack lived, I'm just going to say, listeners, if you're listening to this in November of 2023, I'm turning 40 next week. Jack was 37 when he died. And the amount of life he had in that 37 years is insane. It's just crazy.
I was going to say, I think it's less than 9 years between the start of all of the Agape Lodge to now.
Yeah.
At this point.
Yeah.
L.ron Hubbard has taken all of his money and his second wife and just has left him destitute.
Yeah.
In 9 years. He has founded companies, made scientific breakthroughs, has tremendous magical workings, is the head and no longer the head of a magical order a couple times in 9 years.
Yeah. This is, in my opinion, the lowest point of Jack's life. He after being kicked out of JPL, he was working for other government organizations on and off. There's this, because his occult stuff was known to everybody, people thought it was really, really weird. The government was still like, we need this guy. Like, this guy's a genius. so they keep giving him government clearances for certain areas to be able to work. At this point, he gets back. He loses all of his clearances. He's pumping gas. The guy who created the chemicals for one of the most largest steps for us to be able to go to the moon in Galset 53 as a solid state fuel he's a gas jockey. He's pumping gas in Los Angeles. Things are falling apart for him. Cameron, Marjorie Cameron, his lover, she's had enough of his shit. She goes to an artist community in San Miguel de Allende in the state of Guanajuato, Mexico. I've been. It's lovely. I love the state of Guanajuato. It's a very big expat community to this day. Too many white people there for me. I'm just saying I'll stay elsewhere. I'll visit the actual town of Guanajuato in the state of Guanajuato. It's beautiful, but she goes down there. Parsons continues to parson. He continues his sex magic. He's hiring prostitutes to do that. And at this point, this lowest point for him, he says he crosses the abyss, and that there is this thing that's called the Black Pilgrimage of Chorazin. What is this? What does cross the abyss mean?
So in the AA, specifically not the OTO, there is the culmination of the work of the individual magician is to cross the abyss, which is referring to the gap between Tifereth, or not Tifereth, Hokmah and Binah.
Oh, yes.
From the fourth sphere of the Tree of Life to the third. Importantly, there is a gap in the middle pillar of the Tree of Life diagram, that specific one that we all are aware of, that is actually very specifically not really a part of Jewish Kabbalah, yada, 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 asterisk, 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 Thelema, Thelema, Thelema. So what this is the crossing of the abyss, is that attainment of loss. The idea is essentially loss of personhood, or the ego, that you leave behind the manifest world into something truly unmanifest in understanding itself, in that gap. And Chorazin is not the devil explicitly, because there is no devil in Thelema, but is treated as such by much more orthodox Thelemites than myself, as if it is this great adversary of time and a demon and all of these things that will consume you. Asterisk, 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 Thelema, Thelema, Thelema.
But Chorazin is a city within the Bible. The Black Pilgrimage is it's his expression for what he did for these rituals, in which he said that he has crossed the abyss.
Right.
And he does something after crossing it. What does he call himself after this?
Oh, he calls himself the Antichrist.
He's the Antichrist.
He is fully believed at this point, which again, you can't be a famous Thelemite if you don't have some illusions of grandeur.
Right.
But he is fully believed that upon attaining to Binah, the third Sephiroth, that he is now truly Antichrist. Not in any kind of metaphorical sense. No, he is personally the one who is to destroy the work of Jesus Christ upon earth.
And he writes a book.
It does.
He writes a book, the Book of the Antichrist.
It's not a good book.
No.
No one would ever accuse Jack of being a good and coherent writer.
No, I think his writing is crap. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't think he's a good writer at all. But within the book, the Book of the Antichrist says a lot. It's available on the internet. It'll be in the show notes for this episode. But one of the things that he does say is that Babylon will manifest on Earth within 9 years.
Hot take, she did.
Okay, we'll get into it. We'll get into it. So this is the late 40s, and around this time, Jack also does another bit of writing, which is kind of out of place for his more Thelemic stuff, but it kind of isn't at the same time. He writes, "Freedom is a two-edged sword." What is this, Steve?
So if there is a single piece of Jack's writing that I think is actually approaching good, it is Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword.
Okay.
It's an essay. There's technically an out-of-print collection of his extant essays. Um, Also something we'll get into it by the title, The Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword, but it is his political writings. Um, Vaguely libertarian,
Mhm.
but not in the necessarily the right wing sense. He comes out as strongly anarchist, strongly in favor of personal freedom. Again, this is in context of the Red Scare,
Yeah.
all of these like crackdowns by the U.S. government on personal freedom that falls outside of a very specific conservative white Christian world, which he has had to fight against constantly. I think if there is one piece of like occult socialism that is coming out of America, this is probably the one to read.
Mhm. It's an interesting one. It was never produced in his lifetime. It just kind of said it's a short read. You can read it very, very
Mm.
quickly. But eventually, in the late '80s, it was produced as a work, and a bunch of his articles were also produced in there. Look for the cover with Jack with his shirt off, standing.
Mhm.
Yeah, everybody,
Handsome Jack.
handsome Jack Parsons. The ladies love handsome Jack, including Marjorie Cameron. She comes home and finds Jack at the bottom. He's now the Antichrist, and he is shacked up with another woman whose name eludes me right now. They have a fight. Marjorie Cameron's like, "Fuck this! Like, I don't want to have anything to do with this guy." Jack does some interesting stuff here after Marjorie leaves. He tries working for, of all people, Howard Hughes, or the Hughes Aerospace. For people who don't know, Howard Hughes was, if anybody has seen the movie The Aviator by Martin Scorsese, Leonardo DiCaprio plays this guy who was an enormously influential figure in the first half and part of the second half of the 20th century, building aircrafts. He was an amazing figure, bucket loads of money, kind of became a recluse towards the end of the idea of like the recluse who saves bottles of pee and stuff like that, that archetype. That was Howard Hughes. All of that is. Anyways, they wanted Jack's help. Jack starts to work for them. Then he gets fired because again, they look into like what he's doing and is like,
I'm fully convinced I would have loved being around Jack Parsons,
mm,
but I also can fully understand why he seems to be hated
mm.
by everyone he possibly ends up working with.
Yeah. Yeah, he's people have said like working with Jack is that again as somebody who's a genius, he understood things. He rarely wrote stuff down. Like he just had a way of doing things, and people have said, particularly in light of what we will talk about very shortly here, is that he was reckless. He was reckless with a lot of stuff. He was a genius, but he was very reckless with a lot of what he did, and a lot of what he did made sense in his head, but when he was trying to explain to other people, it just wouldn't. So he tried working for Hughes, didn't work. Somebody knocks on his door. The nation of Israel knocks on his door, and they want Jack to emigrate there to do certain things, working on rocketry for the nation of Israel. Somebody from Hughes hears of this and reports Jack to the FBI. Jack is put under for espionage charges on U.S. soil. A whole hullabaloo happens. Jack visits court quite a bit at the last decade of his life. He's defending himself. He's been interrogated a whole bunch of times. But yeah, nothing truly happens with Jack. But his reputation is just like it's absolute dirt after this. So Jack, at this point, he kind of starts his own company. He calls it the Parsons, I believe, Powder Company. He starts crafting explosives. He's making pyrotechnics for Hollywood. So he's got the glitz of Hollywood glamour, but also to supplement starting his own company, he gets a job with another chemical powder company to just be able to pay the bills. Marjorie Cameron, she comes back eventually, and then they both find a place. They get a coach house back on Orange Grove. I would love somebody at some point to talk about this, just the psychogeography of Orange Grove Boulevard, because Jack always wanted to live there. I know there's this whole thing of like it's familiar to him, but Orange Grove Boulevard meant something to Jack, and it'd be interesting to know like just why so much and why he rarely moved away from Orange Grove. I know he grew up there, and I know it was really important to him, but it's I wish somebody would write something about every time you like. Go ahead.
It's Orange Grove in the Mojave, and
Yeah.
I very much want to do like a kind of pilgrimage to those spots, for that same reason of just like there's something here that constantly draws Jack back to these two places. His experiments are in the Mojave, the Babylon working is in the Mojave. He ends up even having his ashes scattered there, and constantly is living in Orange Grove. I think you're right. Those two places end up really having just tremendous impact on him.
He probably could have also saved. It is known as Millionaire's Mile. It was not a cheap place. It's not a cheap place to live, right? But he would always try to live there. So eventually, they had to move into when Marjorie came back. They moved into a coach house. So back in the day, of course, they would millionaires would have coaches, and so there would be when there was no more people. When the automobile became a thing, people kind of got rid of their horses to the glue factory with you, and they would rent out the coach houses for people just to make extra money. That's where Jack goes. With Marjorie. He's living with some other people as well in the coach house. And the bottom floor of the coach house, where the coach would have been, Jack turns into a chemical laboratory, his own personal chemical laboratory. And guess what happened to the coach house? It's party time once again. Oh my gosh. It's people are coming. There's swapping, there's drugs, everything, all of the great stuff. And Jack is doing something where he has this idea to be offer classes on this kind of spiritualism, that spirituality, pardon me, that he calls the witchcraft, and this other spiritual system that he calls the gnosis. Not the greatest at marketing, I'm just going to say, although to us that kind of seems cool, like the witchcraft, but back in the day, just kind of being like the witchcraft and the gnosis. Things don't go great. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to the last month of Jack's life. But what we do know is that Jack and Marjorie decide that they're going to move to Mexico. They're going to go down to Mexico. There's people that say he was offered a job to set up an explosive factories for the government of Mexico for some reason. Whatever it is, Jack is leaving Orange Grove. He's going to take Marjorie with. Marjorie's already familiar with Mexico for the most part. Then they're gonna head down there. So they've got their bags ready to go. They're keeping their bags at Jack's mom's house, who also lives with other people, not at where they're living in the coach house, but on Millionaire's Mile, so on Orange Grove as well. And they're ready to go. Jack, bags packed. And he gets one final order for we need some explosives for a movie that we're doing. I would love to know which movie it was. I don't think it's ever mentioned. I would love to know what that last order was and who it was for, what movie or production it was for. But on June 17th in 1952, Jack gets a rush order. We need some explosions, some big booms, some special effects for a movie. And Jack blows himself up. Huge explosion. Enormous. Have you seen pictures?
Yeah. It's it's like crater level.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm not laughing, but I mean, I'm shocked. So I'll talk about the circumstances of Jack, and then I'll talk about the report as to what actually happened. So Jack is found alive. The upstairs neighbors, they were sitting down. They were sitting down somewhere, and they were knocked off their couch. The explosion was so big, it knocked floorboards off. It was a huge explosion. Jack is found alive. His left arm is blown off. His legs are basically shattered, like he stepped on a landmine. There's a hole in his face that is just gushing blood. He's still alive.
And conscious.
A ambulance comes, they grab him. Apparently his last words were either, "I wasn't done," or, according to somebody else, "Who will take care of me now?" 37 minutes after the the explosion. He is pronounced dead. What occurs immediately after is just not too far away down on Orange Grove Boulevard is that Jack Parsons' mom, who's already been drinking, she's been day drinking. She finds out that her son, Marvel Parsons, is dead. She proceeds to take a whole bottle of pills and some more alcohol, and she kills herself. She commits suicide, very sadly. So Jack was blown up. The report of the accident of what happened is that there was fulminate of mercury, which is an incredibly explosive substance, was being kept in like a coffee can on a bottom level of Jack's laboratory. And remember when I was talking about some people saying that he was reckless? A lot of people have said that this is not true, that Jack might have been killed, particularly Marjorie Cameron, because like he would never do something that reckless. Other people say he would, but it was also people say that particularly people who worked with him, they said that Jack was like sweaty all the time. It is LA. And of course it was June 17th. It would have been pretty hot. Jack probably maybe just had butterfingers. His injuries seem to point to what the coroner said occurred with his legs being blown, but him trying to pick up something that he had just dropped, trying to reach in, blowing off one of his arms. Was he left-handed? Do you know?
I have no idea.
I just thought of that right now. Anyhow, his arm was completely blown off. People have said that he might have been murdered. Some people say it was Howard Hughes. Anyways, we'll touch on this in a little bit, but yeah, 37 years old, just a hell of a life, an incredible life. So that it was sad. It was short. I wish we could have talked a little bit more about the rocketry, but truly it's one of those things. Grab Strange Angel if you're interested in the rocket stuff. He really George Pendle goes through it quite well. This man changed the world. Like him and Edward and Frank, the original members of the Suicide Squad at Caltech, they changed rocketry. And what occurred, just to go back to the rocket stuff, is what occurred because of a lot of Jack's stuff. Edward and Frank were okay. Jack was kind of brushed out of the history of rocketry. And just over the last 30 years, he's getting his name on some plaques. And Jack also has his name on a crater on the dark side of the moon. But no, Jack, we don't go to the moon. The Russians probably beat the Americans going to the moon, if anybody gets to the moon at all. What an insane story. Holy crap. And I've left out so much stuff.
I was going to say, like, we didn't even touch on half of it. Like, this is like that many details that take place over the course of a decade is just astounding to me.
Yeah.
From his introduction to magic to just an explosion to end him.
Yeah.
It's truly wild.
So I got to ask you, Steve, you wanted to come on this show. The romanticism of Handsome Jack. Why is he so compelling to every generation of occultists?
I think part of it is he is truly so American.
Yeah.
Like, he's real. Like, we know about him. The details of his life are fascinating. We have pictures of him. He is, in fact, very handsome. All of these things.
Dashing.
And, like, Crowley's an asshole. But people are, like, very attuned to his writings. And that's why people know him and care about him. Jack is, as far as we can tell, almost the opposite end of it. We are not fascinated by his particular works, most of which don't survive because Marjorie's second husband after Jack burns them all.
Yeah.
And like we just don't have much of an idea of who he ends up being, like magically or politically or philosophically, after he ends up leaving the OTO and calls it a tyrannical organization. We just fundamentally don't know much about it. So a lot of it is projection, I'm sure, but he is American. There is a response to like liberty and magic being a source of that liberty, and just the absolute insane details just drive up this man as just a truly romantic and tragic figure.
I think that's something that is going for Jack Parsons, and you nailed it, is that. But the period of time in which Jack was the most active is kind of, people might crucify me for this, but that was the period of time when America was, in my opinion, the best nation on earth. Innovation was at an all-time high. Hollywood was becoming the cultural juggernaut that it was. And Jack Parsons does have that thing where you do see pictures of him, and man, he just looks really good. He's got the mustache, but man, he is a handsome son of a bitch. And he is the occult epitome of that golden generation of America, with some sex and drugs thrown in. And
Who
just,
doesn't love some sex and drugs thrown in?
but
It's a tawdry tale on top of it. Like, it'd be one thing if all of these details happened to him about the rockets and all of this, but there's something just flatly alluring about a man who, like, fully tried to live a life of I don't even think of indulgence, but of, like, personal freedom, of truly saying, "I'm gonna do peyote because I want to do peyote," and just building a life around enjoyment and spiritual attainment and scientific and business attainment. Like, he's just kind of a renaissance man,
yeah.
but a modern one.
And then we have his counterpart, who was living under rocket fire when Jack was writing for him. Like, that's so strange. So there's an author, I'm just going to say it right now. There's an author that, if Jack Parsons is interesting to you, you need to know this person's work. His name is Peter Gray. He is one of the founders of Scarlet Imprint Publishing, probably my favorite publisher of occult work today. If you want to learn about Jack Parsons, go to Peter. And Peter listens to the podcast. Hi, Peter. Love what you do. Always.
Same, hi.
But what Peter basically says is that the American Rocketry program has these two coils that dig so deep into it. Like, the American dominance of space is from one occultist and a fucking handful of Nazis. Through something like Operation Paperclip, and these weren't just people who were, like, born in Nazi Germany and around. These were people who were Nazis, right? So that's such a strange thing, and it's something that we can't back away from, right? Like,
No, not at all. I think I'm pretty sure I took this from one of Peter's writings somewhere. It's striking that a man who probably, at least spiritually, went past the sphere of the stars is the reason, or sphere of the fixed stars. So it's part of the reason we were able to, like, physically move beyond the sphere of Earth, for the first time ever.
Yeah, it's crazy. But you don't have Jack Parsons if you don't have Crowley, Aleister Crowley. So one of my favorite things, and one of the reasons that I have you on the show again, Steve, is you say some of the most interesting things in our Discord server. But you once mentioned that Crowley, he gets angry at anybody who attempts to do his magic practically, not theoretically, not just sitting around and being like, yes, I get this, but people who start trying to do his magic practically. And most of the ire went towards one person towards the end of his life, and that would be John Whiteside Parsons. So what do you mean by Crowley just hating anybody who tried to do his magic?
So I think this actually continues to this day. If anyone were to ask, what is Thelemic magic? You will hear Liberesh, the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, and maybe a handful of things about journeying and some tarot stuff.
Yeah.
It is all theoretical, it is all preliminary, and it is all fundamentally not supposed to impact the real world.
Mhm.
If you read Crowley, there's lots of stuff that is supposed to impact the real world when you get to it.
Mhm.
Uh, but he seems to fundamentally hate anyone who takes his system seriously. The moment Jack has decided that he is not going to sit around and just wave his hand in the shape of a star for the rest of his life and actually begins to try to apply the ideas of Thelema into his life, both as a politics, as a social moral, and as a magical system, that's it. Now Crowley is angry and upset and thinks that this dumb hick from America is now stepping beyond his britches because he is no longer acquiescing to the master. And I think that's part of the reason why Jack might be the only quote unquote good Thelemite that has ever existed. He was the one who was just like, hey, Moonchild is an occult novel. I'm going to do it.
So
I'm going to make the baby.
let's stick on this for a second. So what is Moonchild?
Moonchild was a novel that Crowley wrote, I think 1918, something like that, about this battle or war between white and black magicians, quote unquote, over the fate of this unborn baby whom I think is supposed to be the incarnation of a goddess. I've never read it. Crowley is not.
I have read it.
Oh, I'm assuming
It's
it's
all
not.
right.
Yeah,
His Simon If stuff is better, but Moonchild.
yeah, yeah. So like that is this whole thing, and Jack takes it seriously.
So
Not seriously in the sense that he thinks this is true, but in the sense of like this is possible, and
right.
I'm going to do it.
So let's talk about the most notorious ritual in the history of Western 20th century Western occultism. We talked about it a little bit, but as much detail as we can here, Steve, so people can really get it. Because I hear a lot of people just bring it up. They'll be like, oh, the Babylon working, assuming that people should know what actually went on. Nobody talks about what actually went on. So let's here and now talk about what actually went on with the Babylon working.
I was say, importantly, with the Babylon working, part of the reason most people don't talk about what happened is because we don't have a lot of details.
No.
Part of that is Jack just never writing anything down, which fine. Or technically, one of the preliminaries of Thelema is you're supposed to keep your magical journal, yada yada yada. But we just don't have many records about what exactly this elaborate Enochian sex magic ritual was supposed to be.
Yeah.
But we'll get there.
So take us through it. So what was the Babylon working?
So we mentioned briefly this is kind of l.ron Hubbard and Jack Parsons doing their Dean Kelly impersonation.
Right.
Specifically, it was based off of the Enochian system. So Jack is usurping his position according to his rank in the AA and OTO. This is supposed to be something that he would accomplish much later on in a higher rank after the appropriate initiations. But he and Hubbard have decided that they're going to get together and use, I believe it's the seventh call that they're trying to use to summon this elemental woman that Jack believes Marjorie Cameron is. So there's a lot of elaborate ejaculation over the Enochian tablets.
I'm gonna jump in, Steve.
Yeah, yeah.
I've heard they didn't actually do that. I heard it was blood.
I've heard both.
Yeah.
Could be both.
Okay.
It could be either. I think this is the big problem. Anytime
Yeah.
anyone is trying to reconstruct this, they're fundamentally speculating
Right.
about what was actually done.
Yeah.
Either way, some form of bodily fluid is cast upon these tablets, and they are repeating these calls. Crucially, they don't do the right one.
Right.
quote unquote. And they're basically doing a version of Crowley's what's the Ethers? The title of the Book of the Ethers.
Lieber Chomek.
I believe that's right.
Yeah, Lieber. Yeah.
Either way,
Bad occultists.
oh
This
God,
is where all the Thelemites just
book,
like stop listening to us. Like,
book
how
references.
dare Douglas, who's got all of this other
The
magic
Vision and the
information in
Voice.
it.
That's what I'm
Oh,
looking
Vision in
for.
the Voice. Okay.
There we go. Of Crowley's scrying of the ethers through Enochian magic as
Right.
a form of embodying the moon child goddess of Babylon.
Uh-huh.
There, gosh, there is so much scrying involved. Yeah, it's a complicated ritual that takes place over months.
Yeah.
That again, we just don't have a lot of details about what actually happened.
We have in one of Peter Gray's best essays, and if this is interesting, if the Babylon working particularly is interesting to you, listener of this podcast, you need to read an essay by Peter Gray called Strange Suppers and Spells Diverse. He goes into it. Jack writes that the whole summoning an elemental thing was from Aleister Crowley's Magic in Theory and Practice. It's not. Peter Gray does the work, so he finds out that it's actually ritual from, I believe, the 8th degree, OTO 8th degree, which is very Enochian. That's the first part. That's the elemental part. And then the stuff that happens a bit later is, I don't know too much about what happens with the scrying, because when Hubbard is a seer, he's more like a scribe, and he writes down certain things. And he also goes up to Jack and says, like, some woman appeared to me, a woman with like red hair, which ties into something that is, which we will talk about in a little bit, which is very familiar to Jack Parsons. But what was the ultimate aim? Did they accomplish the Babylon working? Like, what was the final crossing the finish line?
It takes a couple of steps.
Okay.
That's part of the reason that we talk about the working as a large months-long project.
Yeah.
Initially, this is to achieve the Scarlet Woman, which, if you have your Crowley knows that he had multiples that he believed were the goddess Babylon in human form, and him as the great beast, achieving a woman to be his
Steve,
sexual abuse.
why Babylon? Why is Babylon such a big thing?
So Babylon has such a fascinating place in Orthodox Thelema that is so fundamentally contradictory.
Yeah.
She is apparently the great apocalyptic goddess of Revelation, astrining the beast, the great whore, who will bring all things into herself. She is equated with the Sephira Binah, as a Saturnian figure, as understanding itself, as liberation, love, sex, war. She encapsulates so much that is just purely passion, and passion and understanding inextricably combined. But fundamentally, she is absent from the Book of the Law, in that its 3 chapters are Nuit Hadit and Rahor Kuit, and we are missing apparently the great companion goddess Babylon. But because Crowley has a Scarlet Woman that he is working with, that apparently is in various forms throughout his life, Jack wants to achieve the same kind of thing. Partly, I think this is smarting over the fact that Betty has decided that she wants to sleep with Ron,
Right.
and not him as much anymore. So he's, doing magic to get laid and get paid like everybody else does. Um, but I do believe, at least on some level, there is a spiritual significance to him that he believes he is going to achieve a Scarlet Woman, an incarnation of Babylon upon Earth, to be his partner when he's to become the Antichrist.
Mhm.
But importantly, it translates further on as like the implications of this idea of the moon child begin to like develop further for both Hubbard and Parsons, that this is to bring Babylon to Earth. fully this goddess will incarnate and cause the end of an era. She will bring apocalypse. And that's part of what book 4 claims to be, is her prophecy of coming and arriving upon this plane.
So a lot of people, when they talk about the Babylon working, they'll say that Marjorie Cameron is Babylon. That's incorrect.
Marjorie Cameron is the Scarlet Woman in this scenario. If we are to like accept the way that we're trying to frame all of these things, importantly, Babylon is to come later. Babylon and the Scarlet Woman are connected, but not the same.
Oh my gosh, it's also complex. My goodness. It is an incredible ritual. And again, yes, read Peter's work on the Babylon working. I will also have in the show notes to this episode on the website a pretty good article put out, author whose name eludes me right now, but just about more of like, it actually looks at it from the side of l.ron Hubbard and the importance of such a thing on Scientology and things of that nature, as well as some Enochian magic. Here's what's funny about the whole Babylon working thing, though, Steve, and I'm not sure if you know this, is that well, before it happened, Jack Parsons knew of John Dee and knew of Edward Kelly, but he didn't know the details of the wife swapping and the weird stuff. He only found out about that later, and he wrote about it as like, what a funny coincidence. All of this happened because I'm a huge fan of the phrase, history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Mm-hmm. And it really does. Like there's things that lead me to believe something else. And I'm as skeptical of a magician as, and people have listened to this show. They know my thing. Like a lot of times, I think the Book of the Law is crap. I think Crowley made it all up. Like I think all of that stuff with Rose, I think that's bullshit. Sorry. Mm-hmm. I just think it's dumb. But it's influential. That's why we need to know about it. Jack Parsons and the shit that happened with the Babylon working always has me going like, there's something else here.
It actually goes similarly back to how I find a lot of Dean Kelly's stuff similarly skeptical.
Yeah.
Except their one apparent conversation with the Scarlet Woman, because it echoes simply Thunder Perfect Mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
It rhymes too well for me to not believe that something happened there.
So for people that don't know, are you talking about Daughter of Fortitude?
Yes, thank you.
Daughter of Fortitude. I give so many show notes for this. I have to add to them as we're talking here. But Thunder Perfect Mind is it's a Gnostic writing that was found in the Nag Hammadi.
Notably after Jack is gone. So this is still
found literally the month that the atomic bomb first was tested. Anyhow,
coincidences.
Yeah, there's some strange stuff. Let's focus in on Jack here for a little bit.
Yeah.
Was Jack a shoddy magician? One of a Thelemite in the 20th century, William Breeze, has said that Jack had tried to do with magic what he successfully pulled off with chemistry and rocket science, reading above his level of experience, skipping preliminaries, bootstrapping himself, rewriting the rules to suit himself. For Breeze, Parsons was ultimately a failed magician, a failure that also proved disastrous for the institution of Thelema and the immediate post-war period. Should the folks prepare themselves for a hot take here, or what do you have to say to William?
I got a couple.
Sure.
We'll start with a couple of questions. What is failure and what is success? What are preliminaries? Right. I think Jack is a terrible lodge member of the OTO and probably was a miserable student inside the AA. So sure, on a specific grading criteria, Jack was probably not a good magician to have worked with. He most likely truly did believe that the rules didn't apply to him. But I have really, really strong concerns of what even are these rules? What is reading above your weight? What preliminaries are we even supposed to be taking account for? The way I see it, Jack is extremely successful. Jack made contact, and I fully believe that. I think that, fundamentally, if there was a single Thelemite in those first generations that could be truly called one of the greats and one of the only successful magicians, it is Jack Parsons.
Yeah. I think for William, the the dogmatic approach to things like the OTO and the AA, things of that nature, had to maybe, and perhaps I'm just speaking out loud here as it is a podcast, but I think that in William's idea, that is what makes a successful magician is doing things by the book. And if had Jack perhaps not done that, he maybe wouldn't have died, which is kind of, William didn't expressly say that, but I think that's kind of what he's hinting at. It had Jack actually just done the things he was supposed to do and done the grades the way that Crowley wrote and probably never did himself. I'm just going to say that as well, that perhaps he would have been a successful magician. But instead, he's more detrimental to post-war Thelema than he is to than he would have been to generations after. Because people love Jack now. People absolutely adore Jack. Who's William Breeze? Who's Grady McMurdy? Like,
this might be where I believe Breeze is most accurate. Post-war Thelema died.
Yeah.
And I think I disagree with him in that I think it was a good thing that the OTO died. And it's resurfaced and technically has a lot of influence if you're ever told to start magic the way most people start, at least in the English-speaking world, is going to be because of Thelema and the Golden Dawn. And I will fully describe myself as Thelemish. I probably a little even more than most people, like, kind of buy into a lot of just the, like, structure and mythology and understanding of advanced Thelema. But I do think, like, Jack successfully killed it by showing that you could do all of the stuff you're not supposed to do and be successful at it. Notably, I do think Breeze is also probably a little right that Jack might not have died if he followed the grades and didn't do what he was doing. But my hot take is, again, maybe conjuring an apocalyptic goddess over the course of several months might cause explosions.
Yeah.
But that's my speculation.
Right. I'm fascinated by this part of the story because it's as American as apple pie, and Jack is truly an American icon. Is this nascent American science fiction that things were coming up? Things like Amazing Stories was around at his time. Everything that we think of like green men and flying rockets and like Flash Gordon's ways away, but just like that whole period of science fiction that would later be taken up by people like Heinlein and Bradbury and morphed into something different, to how Jack saw the world particularly. And there's a novel by I just have to pull up the name of the author here, Jack Williamson, who was alive and who was not a friend of Jack, but an acquaintance of Jack. He wrote a book called Darker Than You Think. Do you know anything about Darker Than You Think?
Really don't.
It's a strange book. I've never read it, but it's a strange book. And it's so weird to see. And I've read what Peter Gray has to say about it. And I'm not too sure I understand the connection to Jack's magical world, but it's like there's these people that are they can turn themselves into animals. There's like therianthropy, and that there's this hidden truth to these people that can change into animals, and there's witch hunting and things of that variety. And it's a science fiction book, but the front cover of it has a beautiful red-headed woman with a red tiger face on the cover. And what's interesting is that Jack loved this book. it was his favorite science fiction. He brought the author, Jack Williamson, to a Gnostic mass, a Thelemic Gnostic mass. And Jack Williamson was like, no thanks, bye, weirdo. Later on, while in the middle of the Babylon working, L.ron Hubbard came up to Jack and said that there was a vision of the Empress. He specifically used the word the Empress, and that she was redheaded. And I'm not sure if L.ron Hubbard said that there was also a tiger there. Some people have said that this is obviously like Babylon that they're talking about. I'm a bit more skeptical. I think that L.ron Hubbard was a bit more of like, I think that the interaction when Jack was doing stuff with L.ron Hubbard, I think there was stuff happening, but on his own, I'm a little bit suspicious. I think that perhaps Hubbard saw the cover of this book and just kind of put that in there to continue to entice Jack Parsons for some kind of interest. But where I'm going with all of this is that this kind of science fiction, we're surrounded by science fiction. Most of our stuff is like very science fiction based these days. There's some of the most popular movies every day. But back when Jack was doing stuff, it was a new form of expression. Science fiction was a new way of seeing the world. And so the world of magic, the magical world and the world of science fiction were so intertwined in Jack's mind that you can see that how this kind of thing would be so influential. And it's true. We did a poor job of weaving in Rocketry to Jack's story, but the man had his foot in the world of science fiction and science itself, as well as the world of occultism. And you cannot separate the two. That it just really made such an impact on his life and what he was trying to accomplish in the world that it just basically needs to be said. And more so than that, and somebody how I think took these elements wholesale from Jack Parsons was L.ron Hubbard. Like, you do not have the Thetans, you do not have any of that stuff if it's not for Jack Parsons creating that whole world of science fiction, and magic being one thing. It's incredible. But I got to ask you this, because we can spend a whole episode talking about this guy, and I don't want to. But L.ron Hubbard said that he was a spy for naval intelligence while he was at Agape Lodge. He was doing spying stuff there. There is Marjorie Cameron, who did say that she once walked in on L.ron Hubbard going through the garbage, trying to find documents that had been thrown out for some reason. What do you think, L.ron? Do you think it was all just the way that it happened, that he just happened to be there, that he just happened to shack up with Sarah Northrup, that like all of these things happened? Or do you think that there was something else involved? Because the world of conspiracy and the FBI and the alphabet agencies, actually the CIA wasn't around at that time, but the FBI certainly was. Do you think ONI was around? Definitely. The Office of Naval Intelligence.
I will put my cards on the table. I have a hard time believing anything L.ron Hubbard has ever said about himself.
Right.
Mostly because we know that most of the details of his life that he has published are flatly false.
Yeah.
I think there potentially is some truth to him being a spy. I wouldn't discount it. From what we know about Jack's level of government clearance, the things that he is working on, the fact that he is constantly being investigated and constantly being questioned, it wouldn't surprise me. But it's almost certainly because of his political leanings, not the fact that he is involved in a English-led German sex club. So the fact that what Hubbard takes away are OTO secrets, maybe he had some underlying interests that he discovered while piling around with Jack more than he cared about government secrets.
Yeah. Hot take from Doug Time, and this is not a hot take. This is actually something that Peter Gray, again, bringing up his work, because if you want to know about Parsons, you got to go through Peter these days, wrote a book called The Two Antichrists about L.ron Hubbard and about Jack Parsons. And it is Peter's contention, and I hope I'm not I'm misinterpreting the book, but this is that the true prodigy of Thelema found its true evolution in Scientology. Like L.ron Hubbard was the most Thelemic. He took Aleister Crowley. He was what Aleister Crowley always wanted to be, and he nailed it. Right? Came to an end, not the greatest end to his life in a little motorhome, but or a trailer park, but on drugs that he was railing against in other writings, but he did the thing that Crowley would have wanted him to do. Very fascinating book, The Two Antichrists. And again, Peter's written a lot about Jack Parsons. There's a chapter called Jumping Jack Flash in The Red Goddess by Peter. There's that essay I mentioned earlier about the Babylon working, but also The Two Antichrists, I think, is just an amazing book. Again, we could talk about L.ron Hubbard for a long period of time. I personally just think that L.ron wanted to be Jack Parsons. He's got these things called the affirmations, which is a whole... which it's not sad, but you can understand the whole Emil Coué affirmations thing, like each day in every way my life is getting better and better, that kind of stuff. L.ron Hubbard did this, and he talks about Jack in it. He's like, Jack is your friend. Jack is a great person. Like, Jack just wants to be your friend. Masturbation's not bad. Jack is your, it's a really odd group of affirmations, but I truly think that L.ron looked up to Jack Parsons. Jack was what L.ron probably wanted to be. He took his way of viewing the world wholesale, that whole science fiction, practical rocketry thing, and based a whole religion around it. I don't think he was a spy. I just think he was a shitty, weird con man who was really successful at what he did. And Scientology's, I hope I'm not going to get canceled for this as far as somebody coming after me, but it's sunsetting pretty quickly. Scientology's not doing so good these days for very obvious reasons. Steve, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here because this is the question that everybody wants to know. This is why everybody's listening to this episode right here for the most part, because I keep getting emails about it. First, it's cover Jack Parsons, and then it's this question. Did Jack Parsons open up a fissure in the space-time continuum with his magic workings with L.ron Hubbard, and he let in aliens and UFOs and alien abductions? Because Kenneth Grant, he's got this whole thing that he talks about, I believe, Outside the Circles of Time, where he says, he calls it the UFO flap, that Parsons opened a door and something flew in. There is a book by Nick Redfern called Final Events, in which he talks about the Collins Elite. I touched on them in my Secret Societies episode. This organization within the U.S. government intelligence that believes that Jack Parsons has brought in not aliens, but these things are actually demons from hell, and that we are in end times. Steve, what do you make? what do you make?
I think you can tell what I think.
It is odd. It is odd that all of this kind of stuff, the UFO stuff.
I think UFO phenomena, if I am doing my personal hot take,
sure,
are continuations of similar kinds of experiences of people seeing or being visited by gods and goddesses and angels and spirits, and it is a scientific or science fiction either explanation of the same phenomena. I don't think there is any kind of space-time continuum opening that is somehow new or different than the kind of non-human visitations that humans have had for their entire existence. I don't think Jack is particularly responsible for them. Can't say that I have ever found that line of inquiry particularly compelling.
No. But I ask you this, though, because you made mention of it earlier, and maybe this is not the best time to do it, but let's do it. You think the Babylon working worked. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by that? What happened? Like, what did they let it?
What
Like,
happened?
what? So
Well,
Babylon's here. Revelations going on.
Marjorie Cameron definitely showed up.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
She was the Scarlet Woman. We can probably accept that on face value of whether or not she was conjured. That was what happened.
Okay.
Um, if I am going to put my cards on the table of how I interpret the events of the Babylon working, I think that the Liber 49 is a channeled text of this apocalyptic goddess. And doesn't necessarily mean that it is somehow a prophetic image beamed from the heavens to one Jack Parsons as a prophet of the end times. But I do believe contact was actually made. And ultimately, I think contact of an apocalyptic goddess has consequences. The end of Jack's life is going to be a really confounding puzzle forever because the police ceased to investigate after deciding that it was an accident. Lots of people in Jack's life have speculated murder, some kind of sabotage. Regardless of how it happened, the fact that a fiery goddess of love, sex, war, and understanding was his ultimate ambition and goal, and he ends up in a fiery explosion to end it all, especially with, I believe, his final words of "I wasn't finished." Call out to the fact that I believe he did make contact with one Babylon, and that ultimately required a sacrifice of everything.
Do you think it was a personal revelation? Wasn't the world's?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't think the world is particularly ready for true apocalypse, though. If you're listening in November 2023, it sure feels like it.
Sometimes, man. Yeah, there is this thing, and I don't want to dwell on it too much, but if, again, I keep telling people to listen to my earlier episodes. I did an episode recently on Enochian magic. Jack Parsons and l.ron, they were supposed to, part of the Babylon working, they were supposed to do the seventh Aether. And instead, I believe they did the seventh call, or that might be reversed. Definitely different. The names are different. I think Dio is one and Lil is the name of another. One of the things they were supposed to contact. Jack messed that up. A lot of people point to that being like, that one mix-up is the reason that UFOs are there as well. And this stuff doesn't work like clockwork. I don't think it works like clockwork. I think that there is room for variation and whatnot. Again, I'm not overly versed in Enochian magic, but there is this thing where there was a blunder that Jack confused one thing for the other. And if you ever get involved in Enochian magic, and even if you listen to my episode, yeah, it's the seventh this, it's the seventh that. There's grades within the OTO, which takes some of their stuff from Enochian. It does get very, very confusing, but I don't think that's one of the reasons why we have UFOs right now. They've been around for a lot longer, right?
Yeah,
And contact experiences literally look exactly like fairy experiences to me. And like, there's no it's. Go listen to my episode I just did with Joshua Cutchin too. It's striking the similarities between alien abduction and fairy encounters. So, what can you do? Something that a lot of people, Steve, are talking about with Jack Parsons, and I'm wondering if you can speak to this, is this kind of radical feminism that he had. That Jack Parsons now, despite all of the things that he did, he was ahead of his time as far as feminism. What do you make of this? Do you think it's just scholars now are just trying to take a look at this somewhat problematic and weird engaging figure and be like, you know what, that guy was he was ahead of his time in the way of looking at women's rights and whatnot? Because I think forgive me for jumping on and saying even more before you have a chance to answer, but I'll bet that at the parsonage there, Jack was taking advantage of people. Like, I'm sure that, like, I'm pretty sure that, it was still the 1940s. It was still a man's world, right?
Yep.
I think he was probably doing things that probably weren't great.
I think it's a little both. I do think Jack was probably fundamentally ahead of his time in some of his beliefs, if not his actions.
Okay.
Uh, I think he was probably pretty misogynistic in his day to day life,
Yeah.
just as a matter of existing, like you said, 1940s America. Um, but there are definite things that he writes in some of his essays that point to him at least having a much more profound belief in the power of women as a gender and sex that is central to the way the world must be.
Mm.
He ultimately comes to some kind of like matriarchal conclusion as to what the next aeon will be, that this age of Babylon will be led by women, that women should have full and equal rights to men, which at the time was a radical statement when women could not seek divorce, women could not own property apart from their husbands. That really he did believe in at least a kind of spiritual and political equality of women, even when he didn't necessarily practice that in his personal life. And I think that part of that truly was an encounter with Thelema and Babylon that brought that about.
Mm.
Uh, he was influenced by this radical goddess that is supposed to change everything. In addition to having a religion, at least in partly described as every man and woman is a star, and that all men shall become women and all women shall become men, and there is complicated mystical understandings of sex and gender and sex magic. I think there's like this nexus that he does end up at least explicating, if not living.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, his outlook and theory, his outlook as it appears to Jack Parsons certainly does seem a form of proto. It's ahead of its time as far
Yeah,
as how one would
I
look.
don't.
But
I actually don't think it. Well, again, listener, in November 2023, maybe it truly still is a radical idea that women should have the right
yeah,
to abortion and
yeah.
divorce and all of those things, but most of his positions do ultimately become fairly mainstream in the coming decades after his life.
Very much so. I I think we would be remiss to not bring her up, but truly, I kind of want to do a full episode or at least a Patreon episode about Marjorie Cameron. She's a very important part of the story. Jack fascinates us. Marjorie does as well. Why?
Mhm. I mean, I think you just have to take a peek at any of Marjorie's artwork.
Right? Or her.
Um,
She's a work of art to look at. She's a
she's again,
stunning
there's a
woman.
reason that I think Jack was immediately
Mhm.
taken with her as the Scarlet Woman. The coincidence of the timing of her showing up, if we believe the timeline to be accurate,
Mhm.
but striking red hair, beautiful person, an
Mhm.
artist and bohemian, all of these things. She was an independent woman in a world that wasn't supposed to have those. But ultimately, I believe that if you see any of her artwork, you can see a true spiritual genius living inside of that. Um, Particularly, there are several untitled pieces that I have like viewed that I think are just like striking portraits of encounters with spiritual beings that she has had. One of which is a figure astride a camel, which
Mm.
should ring a few bells to people. I won't name a name because it is an untitled piece and we can't
Right.
speculate too hard.
Yeah.
But the Angel of Death is another one that most people have seen if they've seen her work, which is her portrait of Jack as the Angel of Death. And it is haunting.
Fossil Angels is another one that she did.
Mhm.
That Alan Moore did an essay because he took the title off of Marjorie Cameron's artwork. That just shows how influential it is, and it is a. Even if I hadn't known or read the essay by Alan Moore, which he he shits on contemporary occultism, it's a great essay. Everybody should read it. But the picture, her painting, Fossil Angels, gorgeous, really smoky, ethereal. Yeah, she
Mhm.
is a she didn't like magic. She wasn't a fan of magic, which is why Jack kept a lot of his rituals without her consent, secret from her. But what's funny is that she was called a witch when she was her ambivalence to magic while Jack was alive was that people would she was so striking. And in the day, if you had red hair and would wear red lipstick immediately and even talk to men, on their own level, you immediately been called a witch. And so when Jack was alive, she didn't like magic. She didn't want to have anything to do with it. Jack blows up, and then she doesn't go all in, but magic becomes a part of her life because I think it needed to.
Definitely. Songs of the Witch Woman is a big piece of hers that is at least like starting to point towards those kind of things. I believe she's also in a short art film entitled The Wormwood Star, where she also does a lot of esoteric and occult explorations, if not outright magic.
She is in one of Kenneth Anger's film, or a couple of them. Is it Pleasure Dome? Oh my gosh, no, it is. This is so. Wow. I like everybody listening. This is good. This is going to be great. Which film?
Inauguration of the Pleasure Dome.
Yes, there we go. Yeah, so she's in a Kenneth Anger film. Also adds to her occult props, but it's because of her second husband that basically all of Jack's writings are gone. She was in love with this man, and they stayed together for quite some time, at least until his death. I think I could be wrong there, but yeah, that person took all of Jack's writing and basically turfed it. He chucked it away. Not good. So for people, if you ever look up Jack Parsons, you're going to see a lot of pictures of Jack Parsons, and particularly the ones that are in the best condition are these pictures of Jack, and he's holding what looks like a pipe bomb, and there's a little ignition thing there. That was taken while he was a scientific witness during a trial for a police officer who very definitely put a car bomb under somebody's car. So something that gets talked about quite a bit, and Marjorie's part of this as well, is that some people don't think Jack died by accident. They think that Marjorie says that there was a bomb put under the floorboards, that the whole movie Explosive Things was a ruse, and before he was going to head to Mexico or even emigrate. That's something I didn't mention, is that they were planning on emigrating to Israel. They were going to go to Israel and help them there, but they were going to head to Mexico first. And perhaps that's one of the reasons that one of the alphabet agencies blew Jack up. I have my own opinions. I don't think he was murdered. If you're going to murder somebody, that's like one of the, I guess maybe for somebody like Jack, it might be the only way to make it look like an accident. But if it is, they used way too much explosives. What do you think? Do you think Jack was killed?
My instinct is no.
Mm-hmm.
But I find the evidence of an accidental death that he stumbled into unconvincing. We'll put it that way.
Yeah. The person that he was at that trial for blowing up another police officer, it's very obvious that they had knowledge of explosives. That person literally just got out of jail. And they think that perhaps it was the testimony of Jack Parsons as a scientific witness towards how explosives, he was an explosives expert, was the thing that sealed his fate to go to jail. Got out, decided to take revenge. There's that theory floating around. I don't know. Just his injuries seem like something where, because people do talk about how reckless he was. People talk about, he was pretty fastidious with certain things, and other things he could be very, very freewheeling and disorganized. I don't know, man. It's a weird one. I don't think we'll ever know. His injuries seem to me like, it seems to me the way that he died, I don't think is up for debate. it seems like his injuries are that dropped something, went like tried to stop it from hitting the ground as hard as it did, and make a grab for it, and that's his arms gone, his legs are broken, his face is blowing up. Like that's not a bomb under the floorboards. That's you trying to stop something. So the way that he died, I think, is the way that it happened. As to what happened, I don't really know. It's a mystery.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Steve, here's a big question, because you have said on the Discord that it is your ambition to bring the witchcraft of Jack Parsons to life, to bring it to life. So, what is the witchcraft a la Jack Parsons?
Fundamentally, we won't really know.
Okay.
This is a tragedy of Marjorie Cameron's second husband. Most of what Jack had ever written about the witchcraft, including his teachings that they were offering, were part of the documents that were destroyed. We know a little basic outline. It seems to be a development of Thelema that is focused on the devil and Babylon as a duotheistic religion, similar to Wicca, where they are both the manifestation of God, divinity. Most likely, it still was based in Thelema as at least a religious and magical understanding. Without the trappings of the OTO and without lodge systems and those kind of things. But really, we're just speculating at anything beyond that. It really, if I were to explicate what I believe would be the working of it, it would be trying to essentially build out a practical magic. That's why it's called witchcraft, based off of this understanding of Baphomet and Babylon, or the devil and the Scarlet Woman, these kind of things of freedom and passion, animalism and antagonism as the foundational realities of the world and God.
So, is the witchcraft a lifestyle, do you think? Jack Parsons, would you consider it a lifestyle, a way of being?
I think so, at least in part.
Okay.
Um, it's fundamentally seems to be tied, like if we tie it back into what Jack thought and was practicing and writing about, freedom is a two-edged sword. That is his calling card. The witchcraft seems to be at least like a religious expression of the same thing, of like what we have is freedom. um, Freedom is dangerous. Freedom is not safe. Freedom is not encapsulated in orders and grades and levels and teachings and preliminaries. Freedom is radical. Freedom is liberatory. It is love. It is passion. And it will hurt you because it has to hurt you. There is no way to have a life that is free and open that is then turned in on yourself for protection. I think that there's fundamentally a wildness to it.
So I got to ask you then. I'm going to put the spotlight on it. What do you do in your magic that brings Parsons witchcraft?
Oh man.
You asked to be on the show, Steve.
I did. I didn't know that I was going to be talking about all my details. I think
As much as
we
you
can
can, but,
we can
but
personally. I will at least do this very specific.
Babylon's important too. You talk about her quite a bit on the Discord.
I think part of that is Babylon is at least a personal understanding, even if not like goddess. I'm not sure I necessarily believe in like personalities as these whole things, but is a fundamentally important idea to the way that I approach things. And I think that's like what I was trying to say there. In my own personal life, like most of the folks in the Discord know, I have radically changed the way that I approach my own personal existence pretty fundamentally. And that was off of, massive career changes, to just kind of leap at opportunities to see these kind of things. And I've taken this to heart, that freedom and love are completely intertwined, and leaving behind relationships that are no longer serving me, those kind of things, not even like serving me, that are built on structures and strictures that are seem to be antithetical to the way that these are lived in. And part of that is also that I reject magic that is built in steps. Um, I love spirit contact. I will talk your ear off about Goetia all the time.
Yeah.
I I work from the Verum occasionally, but my magic is much more freeform. It is inspired by lots of things. It's inspired by a lot of rituals and structures. But fundamentally, my goal is contact. And whatever is going to get contact is what works, and what is going to be good and useful. And a lot of times that'll blow up in your face, and a lot of times you get practical results that you're looking for. It's a fundamentally unscientific way of doing things. And I find that very important to me.
Very good. I love it. Thank you for sharing, Steve. My goodness. Why does handsome Jack Parsons matter still?
Jack matters when he is an inspiration. I don't think that Jack, the person, we can get a lot out of anymore. Only insofar, like, he's not an Agrippa. You're not going to base your system on him. You're not going to be able to build something out of him. But I think that if the story of Jack Parsons and the works that he does seem at all liberatory to you, then I think that's when Jack matters. Is when, as a magician, as a dead magician, one of our ancestors, if that calls to you, follow that call. It's maybe a dangerous one that'll get you blown up.
I always liked in Alan Moore's Promethea. This might be a little bit of a diversion. There's a part of that book in which Promethea is going on the Sephiroth of the Tree of Life, and at one point they go to I forget which one it is. It's close to the top, but there's these Enochian tablets, the Watchtower tablets. The Binah, yeah. That's right, the City of Pyramids. And forgive me for not remembering which Sephiroth it was, everybody. Immediate unfollow.
That's my favorite issue of Promethea.
Yeah.
Very obvious reasons.
And John Dee is there. John Dee's their guide to the Sephiroth, and he points to one part of the Sephiroth with a man on fire. And it's Jack. And it's Jack's on fire. And that's how Jack has been to me. If people listen to my prologue, which I released in June of 2019, I talk about stories being integral to magic and the occult. And that the best stories are those ones in which magic has its real history. It's removed of the unnecessary myths. I'm immensely drawn to the big stories. And Jack Parsons is the great occult story of North America. I think he's such a fascinating figure. He is that bonfire that when things start getting a little bit off kilter, you can go and warm your hands. If they're feeling cold from the rituals you're doing, warm your hands at the story of the ever burning Jack Parsons. Not to do the things that the way that he did them, but just in the brightness of his own bonfire, a bonfire of his own creation, and come back to be inspired, just like Steve says, to do something yourself, free of what anybody else says. My goodness. Jack Parsons. Steve, if people want to get to know Jack a little bit better, what do you think the best course of action? Say this is literally the very first time that a listener has heard of John Whiteside Parsons. They're like, you know what? This was a cool story. I want to learn a little bit more. Steve, what do you prescribe? Where to go?
So there's a couple of biographies that are written. Strange Angel is one of the most well-known. Sex and Rockets
I
is
love that book. Sex and
that
Rockets
one's a little more occult oriented.
but he fucks some stuff up in there. There's Jack. So the guy who wrote that is a ghostwriter. They don't know. Some people suspect it was the actual person who started the company, Feral House. I don't really know. Anyways, there's a thing in there that has Jack Parsons having sex with his mom and a dog.
Yeah.
That didn't happen. Sorry. But the other stuff in that book is great. So I agree. Yes, Sex and Rockets by Jack Carter. Is that the name of the guy?
I believe so.
Yeah.
But those two, I think, are great. The two Antichrists, like you mentioned, the work of Peter Gray in general is incredible on this kind of stuff. The Red Goddess, Two Antichrists, and the Brazen Vessel are the three books from him that would at least have all of his Jack materials in there if you really want to dig in deep. None of that is friendly to someone who is just encountering him. But if you have any like hook into all of this, and it is out of print, unfortunately, but Freedom is a Two-Edged Sword is his collection of essays that have been published that you could find, I believe, at least a few of them online.
Yeah. I'm going to say exactly the same thing. I've got a lot of show notes to a lot of these things in the episode here. Everybody go and have a look at the show notes. I just think Peter's work, Peter Gray from Scarlet Imprint. He's not paying for this episode, by the way. Just everybody. I brought him up a lot. Peter's work on Jack Parsons is exceptional, and he does the yeoman's work of actually going through a lot of the letters and everything. He talks about having a copy of this book, Darker Than You Think, in his hands. Peter has done the work for Jack Parsons and keeping that bonfire stoked so brightly these days. For myself, I would highly recommend people look into as many. I'll have some stuff in the show notes, and they're a little bit long, but if you're interested in the scientific aspects, please do me a favor to do yourself a favor. His rocketry stuff and how that got started is so fascinating. I find it incredibly fascinating. I think it's almost as fascinating as his occult stuff and the nascent rocket science that got us past this world, out of this atmosphere, is incredibly fascinating. But yeah, Sex and Rockets, also a lot of fun. Great read. It's about 200 pages or so, but you can just blow through it. It's a fantastic book. Oh my gosh, 2 hours and 21.
I would be remiss if I don't recommend the television show that got canceled, also called Strange Angel. You can find it on Paramount Plus. I'm sure there's other places to find it. It's a slow burn. I loved it. Unfortunately, it was canceled literally after l.ron Hubbard shows up.
Oh, really? That's where they ended.
That's where it gets. That's where it ends. But it's fictionalized clearly, but very well done.
Yeah. Go read the books. Actually, read both of them. I find Strange Angel and Sex and Rockets, they kind of complement each other quite well. And I didn't finish Strange Angel because I just started reading it for this episode. I literally read 3 books in preparation for this episode, and Strange Angel has some really good stuff about the rockets, but he also says everybody says weird stuff. If you're not an occultist, you say weird stuff about Jack Parsons. If you are an occultist, you say weird stuff about Jack Parsons. He just draws such things. Steve, Man, thank you so much for helping me out of a bind for this episode. I was sweating. People were like, "Oh, you dropped an episode on Julio Cesar with Julio Cesar Odie, and then nothing for Halloween, you piece of shit." So I needed somebody on the show, and truthfully, when the wind blows some way, I got a few emails and people on Discord being like, "Talk about Jack Parsons, talk about Jack Parsons," and then of course, I take curses seriously, so every demon of hell. That sounds bad. It doesn't sound good.
You don't just do that on a Friday night?
TGIF. But yeah, this has been enormous. Thank you so much for talking to me today, Steve. You're not on the social media anymore, are you?
No, I nuked all of that very happily. No longer have much of an internet presence at all. Though if you happen to be in Chicago and some occult nonsense wants to be gotten into, people can find me on your Discord, and I'm happy to indulge.
Amazing. I don't know if we want to talk about this, but you're going to be opening up your own barbershop sometime here.
Oh, down the road, but yeah,
Okay.
I will. I'll be your occult barber. Give you some blessings and conjurations and enchantments as
Nice.
your hair gets all snipped up and pretty.
Perfect. Is there any bloodletting at your
Oh, thank God, no,
No? Okay.
absolutely not.
Oh.
That, unfortunately, is illegal. And if you want to know why, you can listen to the episode on Paracelsus that I was also on.
That's right. Oh, Steve bringing it all the way around. I love it. It's Steve, I love having you on the Discord, and I love everything you have to say. And truly, the amount of people that were like, you have to get this person to talk about Jack Parsons. You have to get this person to talk about Jack Parsons. I was humming and hawing, and so I needed a crisis. I needed a crisis to be like, you know what? Just pull this Parsons Band-Aid off. And I'm so glad that you were able to talk to me by phone today, by landline. I'm going to hang up now, Steve. I'm going to hang up the phone, and thank you so much for talking to me again. And thank you for talking about Jack Parsons. I know we got a pretty special episode, and I hope everybody enjoys it. But I got to go make some dinner now. And thanks for joining me to talk about the marvel that is John Whiteside Parsons. Parsons fucked it up. I got so close. I was so eloquent this entire episode. And I dropped the mercury at the very end, and it blew up in my face.
Boom. All right. Well, good night, Doug. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Steve. Goodbye. Well, that was fun. I am so glad that Steve actually picked up the phone that time and decided to answer and decided to talk to me for 2.5 hours about the one and only Jack Parsons. So a lot to go over for this episode, I am sure. And guess what? There's going to be a lot of show notes for each and every person that goes to whatmagicisthis.com and checks out the show notes there. Trust me, if you want to learn more about Jack Parsons, head to my website and check out the show notes for Jack Parsons. Also on whatmagicisthis.com, you'll find a link to my Twitter account, as well as my Instagram account and my Facebook account. I am kind of not on them as much as I used to be, just because I'm spectacularly busy. But I tend to post interesting things every once in a while, or share interesting things on Twitter, and every once in a while I'll do something on the Instagram that's kind of funny. Anyhow, but please follow me if you feel like it. Do you think that I'm doing something kind of cool here on What Magic Is This, and you would like to show your support in some way, shape, and or form? Well, now you can. And in fact, you have been able to since October of 2021. But let's go through it as we do in each and every episode. So the first way is the absolute best way, and that is supporting me through Patreon. My Patreon is literally a whole different podcast. I do a whole different thing. You get to see magic from my eyes, it is like a whole different new show. And I know there was a large break between the last episode and this episode that you're listening to right now. For $7 a month, you could have hopped onto the Patreon and you have well over 100 hours of my Patreon offerings, audio episodes, videos, all sorts of things. I do episodes on saints and entities. I do things on grimoires and books I think you need to read as a magician, videos on how to create your own incense, how to scry, use a pendulum. Just released a fantastic episode on Isabel Gowdy. And if you don't know who Isabel Gowdy is, my goodness, you better learn yourself. But some of the most fantastic stuff that I've ever done. I think my best material is all on the Patreon. So that's basically my pitch. My next episode, I'll have a little snippet of Isabel Gowdy. That little episode, I'm going to put it on the next episode because this one's getting pretty long here. So I'll have a little sample of that for the next show that follows this one, which shouldn't be out in too long. But anyhow, all I'm trying to say is I would love to have your support on Patreon. It's basically my job. This podcast is my job. And if you support me on Patreon, that is the way of seeing more shows being made by me. If the Patreon supporters go away, What Magic Is This goes away. And don't be fooled. Patreon has done this whole new thing that I'm not really a fan of, where people can kind of like join my Patreon for free, but like you don't get the content or the offerings or my stuff, but it still lists you as somehow being a member. And I love the fact that you're a member. If you do this and you're not paying the $7 a month, all well and good, all cool. But also people will go to my Patreon and be like, oh, Doug's fine. He's got 450 patrons. I have 100 less than that. I've got about 350 people supporting me. That's still quite a bit of people, but it's definitely not 450 like Patreon says it is. Anyhow, not a huge fan of that because, yeah, people are just like, oh, Doug's fine. I'm fine. Could be better. Always could be better. And so Patreon would be the best way of making my life better, easier, more episodes, less stress. My things get released when I can. As I mentioned, I got sick, so I'm not blaming my lack of patrons for me getting sick, but it's just one of those things where to not worry about my life and my finances would be a great relief. So if you can see your way to supporting my show, which is a whole different show, again, it is the best stuff that I do, in my opinion. Nobody's making programs like I do on Patreon. I'm going to say that. Nobody does what I do on Patreon. If you join the Patreon, you can hear that for yourself. Anyhow, patreon.com/whatmagicisthis, or head to whatmagicisthis.com and click on any number of the Patreon links there. Another way of supporting me, if you don't want to give me the $7 a month, you can just give me a lump sum through PayPal. Head to What Magic Is This, click on any number of the PayPal buttons. That's $5, $10, $20, any amount, $7.77, $93. Because of Thelema, who knows? Anyways, but all of that money literally goes back into making this podcast run. It goes into hosting fees, my internet. I pay out the nose for internet. I don't know if people realize how expensive internet is in Canada. I have the best internet for where I live. It's not cheap. Anyways, if you choose to support me via PayPal, that money goes straight back into the podcast and just helps with the monthly costs. And the third and last way of supporting my show is showing your support. I don't see a ton of money from this, which is okay, but I love the fact that you're going to buy some merchandise. So head to whatmagicisthis.com, go to the menu there, click on the merch button. You're going to find a whole load of really cool things, from tote bags to t-shirts to hoodies to kids, little babies, toddlers' clothes, to wall art, to mugs. The mugs are awesome, and I recently just put up a Halloween logo, so it's not as timely, but it's still a really cool logo. It's a wonderful logo, and truly, I love seeing people in my What Magic Is This merch. It's amazing. I always appreciate it. But yes, I don't see a ton of money that way. I think last month I made $3 American, which is $4,000 Canadian. Just kidding. It's not, but it's getting there. The economy is fucked up here. Anyhow, it has been said that Canada is literally 6 mining companies in a trench coat, and it's true. 6 mining companies and a whole bunch of really rich families. So anyhow, Well, what am I talking about? Oh, yeah, buy some merchandise, please. Capitalism. Sorry, it's more consumerism is the problem. Doesn't matter. Any amount helps. It's all well and good. Please find a way to support me. I love PayPal. I love the merchandise, but I would love more than anything in the world to see you support me on Patreon. Become one of the Patreon supporters. You get to pick what gets broadcast on this podcast, to polls for what kind of offerings I make on Patreon. It's a great time. We have a great Discord community. My Patreon is great. I'll just say that. And again, it's my best work. I do some amazing stuff. So stay tuned next week. We'll have a little snippet of my Isabel Gowdy episode, because I think it's one of the best things I've ever done. It's fantastic. Anyhow, all of those things can be found at whatmagicisthis.com. Thank you, each and every one of you, for waiting for this episode. I'm so happy that I was able to cover somebody. And yeah, it's been a long time since it's been 11 months since we dipped into the Fool's Gallery. I've been busy. I've been talking about fairies for 7 episodes. Right? I love those episodes. They're great. And you do too. Admit it. Anyhow, thank you so much for listening in on the phone call between Steve and I. And in its amazing unedited glory, I hope you found Jack Parsons as compelling a figure as both Steve and I do. I want each and every one of you to stay healthy, to stay hopeful, and to stay luminous. We will talk at you soon. Goodbye, everybody. Blast off. Play us out of here already.